Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, brought to you by the members of GrandTheftWorld.com. This is episode 123, is the Red Velvet Revolution. It's been a slow news week. Nothing really is going on this week, except it's okay to talk about COVID coming from a lab because former CDC Director Redfield said so in a testimony in front of the Congress. So now that news that we've known for 3 years and we've had the evidence of for 3 years is now it's acceptable in mainstream media and maybe even on YouTube and such places, Facebook, to say such things with more interest of where did the the COVID pandemic really originate? Where did it come from? Who covered it up? Why did they cover up? And is anything ever going to happen to these people? We will find out as we go. But it's interesting now that everyone else gets to know what we've known here on this show since probably episode 7, when we laid out all the exhibits showing what happened, and everyone's being told today.
Chairman, for 2 years, myself and the other Republicans on this subcommittee connected the dots. We exposed the evidence supporting our strong belief that COVID was developed and leaked from the Wuhan lab. And during those same 2 years, the same Democrats that sit on this committee, they only hindered, they obstructed, they refused to hold hearings and get to the truth. Now we see mounting evidence supporting the COVID-19 originated from the lab in Wuhan, China, run by the Communist Chinese Party. And this hearing is about getting to the truth. I thank the chairman for making this the very first hearing, because the American people who have seen just as many fellow Americans die from COVID, as nearly as many die from COVID, that died in every war since the American Revolution combined, deserve to know the truth. Dr. Redfield, you pointed to the lab leak theory even before we did. In mid-January of 2020, you expressed concerns to Dr. Fauci, to Jeremy Farrar of UK's Wellcome Trust, and to Dr. Tedros of World Health Organization that, quote, we had to take the lab leak hypothesis with extreme seriousness. And you urged Dr. Fauci to investigate both the lab and the natural hypotheses. Shortly thereafter, on February 1st, Farrar convened a meeting of a group of 11 top scientists across 5 time zones and asked Dr. Fauci to join, and he wrote, quote, my preference is to keep this group really tight. Obviously, ask everyone to treat in total confidence, unquote. Dr. Redfield, you were excluded from this call, but up until then, you had been on you were included in every other conversation. What changed? Why do you think that you were excluded from these conversations?
Thank you very much. I think just to emphasize, in early to mid-January, I did have multiple calls with Fauci, Farrar, and Tedros about how important I thought it was that science get engaged in aggressively pursuing both hypotheses. I also expressed, as a clinical virologist, that I felt it was not scientifically plausible that this virus went from a bat to humans and became one of the most infectious viruses that we have for humans. All viruses are not the same. So when you look at coronaviruses, for SARS and MERS, for example, when they entered the human species, which they did via an intermediate, they never learned how to go human to human. Even to this day, they don't know how to go human to human. So you can't equate Ebola with a coronavirus.
Now, why do you think you were excluded from those calls?
Because it was told to me that they wanted a single narrative and that I obviously had a different point of view.
Okay. In emails following the conference call, 4 of the 11 scientists told Fauci that they all found the genetic sequence inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, basically what you're saying. However, just 3 days later, these 4 scientists had drafted a paper arguing the exact opposite, and that's now the infamous proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. Our investigations show that this paper was prompted by Dr. Fauci, among others, with a goal to disprove the lab leak theory. What is the likelihood that these scientists came across additional information just 3 days after making these statements to conclude with such certainty that COVID-19 came from nature instead of the lab leak that they thought it was 3 days earlier?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. Again, I've said this before, that this whole approach that was taken on February 1st and subsequently in the month of February, if you really want to be truthful, it's antithetical to science.
Thank you.
Science has debate, and they squashed any debate.
Thank you. Given what we know now and looking at all the conversations in February of 2020 and before the release of the paper, do you think that Dr. Fauci used this paper to hide the gain-of-function research created this virus?
I can't talk about Fauci's motivation.
Do you think that the paper does hide the truth?
I think it's an inaccurate paper that basically was part of a narrative that they were creating. Remember, this pandemic did not start in January at the seafood market. We now know there was infections all the way back into September. This was a narrative that was decided that they were going to say this came from the wet market, and they were going to do everything they could to support it, to negate any discussion about the possibility that this came from a laboratory.
I got 20 seconds left. Dr. Fauci was affirmatively told in an email that NIAID had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through EcoHealth Alliance. He was told this in January 27th of 2020. Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
3 years ago, if you thought it came from a lab, if you raised that, you were called a nut job, you got censored on Twitter, you were blacklisted on Twitter, you were even called a crackpot by the very scientist who in late January sent emails to Dr. Fauci and said it came from a lab. They called you crackpot. Is that right, Dr. Redfield?
I think the most upsetting thing to me was the Baltimore Sun calling me a racist because I said this came from a Wuhan lab.
Dr. Redfield, you ran the CDC and you were on the coronavirus task force, is that right?
Correct.
That was formed on January 29th, 2020, is that right?
Correct.
2 days later, Dr. Fauci gets an email from Dr. Anderson which says what? Virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding.
Next day, I know, did he share that email with you, by the way, Dr. Redfield?
No.
As a member of the task force, as the head of CDC, did he share that email with you?
No.
Okay, next day, February 1st, Dr. Gary sends Dr. Fauci another email. That email says, I don't know how this happens in nature, but it would be easy to do in a lab. Did he share that email with you, Dr. Redfield?
No.
You didn't see either one of those emails, even though you're head of CDC, even though you're on the coronavirus task force that had been formed just 3 days earlier.
No.
3 days later, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, who told us it came from a lab in emails to Dr. Fauci that Dr. Fauci wouldn't let Dr. Redfield see, 3 days later, they changed their position 180 degrees. The question is why? Mr. Wade, why would they change their position that fast when the only intervening event is a conference call with Dr. Fauci, the guy who wouldn't let Dr. Redfield see the very emails that they had sent him, Dr. Redfield, head of CDC, on the coronavirus task force? Why would they change their position, Dr. Wade, or Mr. Wade?
Well, if you're looking at the timeline, on May 21st, just a few weeks after the Nature Medicine article had come out, two of the signatories of the original email to Dr. Fauci, that's Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, were awarded a $9 million grant for the...
So there's 9 million reasons why they changed their mind. I knew you'd get to it. I read that last night. 3 months after, so 3 days after they say it came from a lab, they changed their position, and the only intervening event's a conference call with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins. Again, a call that Mr. Redfield was not allowed to be on, the head of CDC and on the coronavirus task force. And then 3 months later, shazam, they get $9 million from Dr. Fauci. Well, isn't that something?
Next, censorship. Industrial complex is a new phrase in our vernacular. It comes to us from the Twitter files, and it definitely shows that there's a lot of censorship going on, and it has been systematic. It was not accidental, and censorship is the refuge of the weak scoundrels that have been running this place for the past couple of years. So it's about time that people started to realize that the censorship needs to end for freedom to begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method. Unhappily, the danger it poses promises to be of indefinite duration.
Eisenhower's fears were well-founded. Today, American taxpayers are unwittingly financing the growth and power of a censorship industrial complex run by America's scientific and technological elite, which endangers our liberties and democracy.
Demolishing free speech cultural narratives Americans valiantly and successfully defended by the grace of God. The propaganda industrial complex monstrosity that Obama quietly modernized in 2012 is now rampaging across America.
A guy that's done memes on Hillary Clinton, I think this came from a couple years ago in the 2016 campaign. He's facing 10 years in prison.
Well, remember, there's this statute that, again, was originally designed to prevent the Ku Klux Klan from intimidating African Americans from being able to vote at the polls. And they're saying that, well, this wasn't intimidation, but it was a kind of deception because people are going to think it's real and they're going to text Hillary instead of going to vote, even though, as I mentioned, they haven't been able to produce a single aggrieved party that didn't vote as a result of this satirical meme. So the whole premise is ridiculous. But again, they're trying to expand it such that you're not just going to be censored and deplatformed for disinformation. You're going to be thrown in jail.
Now laid to waste by the creeping socialist sabotage of the Biden administration.
Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
I give you Exhibit A, as Jamie White reported. Richard Stengel, a former State Department official under Obama and founder of the Global Engagement Center, which has come under scrutiny since the Twitter files revealed the extent of its role to censor the American people who defy establishment narratives.
Propaganda, I'm not against propaganda. Every country does it, and they have to do it to their own population, and I don't necessarily think it's that awful.
Emails in the Twitter files revealed that the GEC was a key entity involved in the social media platform censorship policies, working as a go-between for the federal government and Twitter.
For every government agency scanning Twitter, there were perhaps 20 quasi-private entities doing the same thing, including Stanford's Election Integrity Partnership, NewsGuard, the Global Disinformation Index, and many others, many taxpayer-funded. A focus of this fast-growing network, as Mike noted, is making lists of people whose opinions, beliefs, associations, or sympathies are deemed misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. That last term is just a euphemism for true but inconvenient.
We are now experiencing something alien to our system of government and civilization: censorship in real time, as the walls of the First Amendment crash down in a controlled demolition.
So, Mr. Taibbi, do you believe that the Russians and their oligarch-controlled Internet Research Agency interfered in the 2016 election via this social media disinformation campaign? Do you believe that?
Mr. Congressman, my disagreement with the issue is...
I think this is basically a yes or no question. Either you think so or you don't, and I don't have a lot of time, so...
Okay, well then I'm going to answer not in the sense that that you're putting it.
Okay.
I think all countries engage in offensive information operations. The question is scale.
Do you believe that
the
Russia
Twitter files
in hacking, reclaiming my time? This is how it works now. I'll ask the questions and you try to provide an answer if you can.
You have to allow him to answer.
Do you believe?
You crossed that line with the Twitter files.
No.
Elon Musk, it's my time. Please do not interrupt me. Elon Musk spoon-fed you his cherry-picked information, which you must have suspected promotes a slanted viewpoint, or at the very least generates another right-wing conspiracy theory.
This isn't just a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now. There are many legitimate questions about where Musk got the financing.
Ranking Member Plaskett, I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not exaggerating when I say that you have called before you 2 witnesses who pose a direct threat to people who oppose them.
We're going to conflate. The First Amendment is not absolute.
Once the First Amendment, which is on life support, is gone, a totalitarianism which the human race has never experienced will rise up, and this country we know as the United States of America will be no more.
I never thought in my own country that freedom of speech would be threatened in this way, and it's just frightening when you get into it.
That's what's going on now. There's an order that comes from a small group of people. We don't know who they are. We can't ask. It comes on from high, and they're saying, you need to say Latinx now. And you need to say, you know, a person experiencing homelessness. And I feel like this is why woke becomes a joke, because you'd rather rename it than solve it.
We're going to get into that because the next story on our agenda of the Slow News Week, January 6th, they've said for 3 years now that it's worse than 9/11. We've had political prisoners in Gitmo-like situations, held without trial, held without evidence, and these things being exchanged. Now we have evidence that it's not 3,000 smoldering bodies. It's actually a reverse story of what the Democrats told people. So it's not only not worse than 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, it actually shows the corruption in government at the highest levels, systematically putting Americans who are innocent in prison for their own political agendas, for their own aggrandizement, because the Democrats definitely rose to power on this sort of January 6th insurrection narrative that has completely evaporated thanks to Tucker Carlson. And despite the best efforts of Chuck Schumer to get Fox News to pull Tucker's show, the footage is actually making it out there. And I look forward to the public reviewing the 40,000 hours of it, just as I look forward to the public eventually seeing the Twitter files, because we haven't seen them. Only a couple people have seen these things.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the U.S. Capitol building. If you've joined us today for the insurrection, please make sure you pick up a promotional leaflet on the way in, stay inside the safety cordons at all times, and if you get lost, speak to one of our Capitol police officers. They'll be sure to point you in the right direction. And be sure to set aside a little time today to join us for some insurrection activities, including our photography tour, our fancy dress competition, and have a go on our climbing wall. But don't forget those safety ropes. And I've now received the results of our fancy dress competition. The winner today is Jacob Chansley. That's Mr. Jacob Chansley. If you could report to your nearest Capitol Police officer, they'll be sure to give you your prize, a guided tour of the building.
Tucker Carlson opened a wormhole in the Congressional Country Club space-time January 6th continuum, presenting unseen video footage, revealing that the complete story had not only not been told, but it had also been doctored by the January 6th committee to satiate the Trump derangement syndrome mental illness rampant in Washington, D.C.
Footage from inside the Capitol overturns the story you've heard about January 6th. Protesters queue up in neat little lines. They give each other tours outside the Speaker's office. They're not destroying the Capitol. They obviously revere the Capitol.
The controllers and their media minions went on the offensive, doubling down on the big lie, using the old tired strategy that had secured their positions, lies baked into an unyielding barrage of mind control repetition.
The power of repetition is such that, people like Tucker Carlson, who know they're lying to the public, can convince tens of millions of people of those lies.
Tucker Carlson took a page from George Orwell's 1984 and told his viewers to reject the evidence of their eyes and ears.
Is this a lie? I think it's bull.
Fox executive Hannity Carlson shows are not credible sources of news.
100 officers were assaulted on that day. 5 officers died.
Who are these 5 officers who were, quote, killed that day? Notice he didn't tell you. No one ever tells you. No one ever shows you their autopsies. They don't want any detail. They just want the slogan. Now, they're counting Brian Sicknick. That's a lie. But who are the other 4? Well, those are 4 officers who killed themselves.
These are the facts they can't dispute.
Here is surveillance footage of Sicknick walking in the Capitol after he was supposedly murdered by the mob outside. By all appearances, Sicknick is healthy and vigorous. He's wearing a helmet, so it's hard to imagine he was killed by a head injury. We do know from contemporaneous videotape that a mysterious figure called Ray Epps encouraged the crowd to go into the Capitol. For some reason, Epps has never been indicted for that. But there's no question he did it.
We need to go into the Capitol!
Why don't you guys open up the restaurant? Because I think that would probably be illegal. Do not go in there!
We did it! You were right, we did it!
Dude, I was trying to tell you.
But you weren't recording, were you?
I'll delete that.
How, in a free country guided by the Constitution, were these people allowed to withhold evidence from Jacob Chansley's lawyer? How could that happen? Had you seen that clearly exculpatory tape of your client at trial?
No. Where is your backup? This is our damn Capitol building, and y'all are letting it get destroyed on your watch!
Anybody who watched that video with their own eyes in a real way would disagree with what was just stated. The president has been very clear. January 6th was the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
The Weather Underground setting off a bomb in the Capitol in 1971, and the Armed Resistance Unit doing the same in the Senate in 1983 were the last major attacks on the U.S. Capitol. But there can be no mention of those attacks because it would surely open old wounds surrounding Obama's relationship with Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn, and Bill Clinton's pardoning of 16 members of the FALN who blew up innocent Americans at Fraunces Tavern, where George Washington said farewell to his officers in 1783.
Question number one, why did President Obama release the bomber? His name was Oscar Lopez. Why did he do it?
Because he agreed with them. Lopez was the leader of the FALN who bombed Fraunces Tavern. They took responsibility for it. He's a Chicago guy. His brother, Jose, is a community organizer in Chicago. And he had sympathy, in my view, Obama had sympathy for these terrorists.
There were going to be bombshells throughout the week, but it appears Tucker was finally roped in by Rupert Murdoch's lawyers. However, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has now vowed to release the January 6th security footage to the general public. It belongs to the public after all.
Also, the second biggest bank failure in American history, Silicon Valley Bank, erupted this week. There's a bank run. It's going to have a little domino effect through the markets. A lot of people took money from that bank. Companies that you might be doing business with, maybe Coinbase had something. So that we're going to learn about that stuff tonight because ongoing consequences be happening.
The Silicon Valley Bank collapsed yesterday, marking the worst bank failure since the Great Recession and the second biggest bank failure in U.S. history. Which means only one thing, that CNBC's financial guru, Jim Cramer, recommended people buy the stock just a few weeks ago.
SVB Financial, don't yawn. This company's a merchant bank with a deposit base that Wall Street had been mistakenly concerned about.
Wall Street is mistakenly concerned about them. Jim Cramer knows what's best. Buy, suckers!
It's a very compelling situation. Hey, by the way, long-term private equity and venture capital, they're not going away. Being the banker to these immense pools of capital has always been a very good business.
It's always been good business. Well, that was then, and this is now.
Yeah, this really is an earthquake, especially for the tech community. Silicon Valley Bank dropped by 60% yesterday alone. We just learned today that California regulators have shut this lender down.
So, of course, it's on Jim Cramer's favorite list. Just last week, it was also on Forbes' list of America's best banks for the 5th year in a row. This bank specialized in lending money to startups, which don't have the greatest track record for becoming profitable or succeeding in any way, shape, or form. And so they say the reason that it failed is because it lent out too many risky loans, and it's contained just to this one bank, and it's not going to spread to others, and there's nothing to worry about at all, which makes me worried because we know how big of liars these people are. Personally, I can't help but wonder whether or not they were lending out too many loans based on affirmative action instead of solid business plans, because they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment, saying that their efforts were to foster more inclusive culture and increase racial, ethnic, and gender representation.
And last but not least, let's kick it off with Luke Rudowski from wearechange.org and thebestpoliticalshirts.com. And let's get fact up for the next few hours.
Oh. Now let her have it. You're going to have to let some of that out. That's too much. That's too much. You're going to get caught. Okay. You better. You got to be quicker than that. The moment you walk. Round two. She is not playing. None to lose.
Wow. You know, society is definitely decaying when the criminals don't even have to be smart anymore. And probably with the police time, she could probably even fill that bag up even more there. This says, I think it's fair to say California has definitely seen better days. And what did you expect from one of the highest taxed places in the world?
If you take time to put some skills between your ears, like the students in Autonomy Season 9 are about to do in a couple weeks, those transport wherever you go. They make yourself useful and provide service wherever you go. Whatever currency is being exchanged, you're there to facilitate that business. So if you want to come to, we're doing an Ask Me Anything, only on the topic of autonomy. Don't get excited. Ask Me Anything, March 19th. It's a Sunday. The requirement to get in is you have to go to getautonomy.info/ignite. And there's something called the obstacle course. Now, if you click down on this page, there's a button someplace. I'm interested. You click that, you come over here, enter the obstacle course. You find out if the course is right for you. It's complete transparency. Before you set foot into the course and do anything, you can find out risk-free. So you go ahead, it's a free offer, and you get complete transparency to see what's inside Autonomy, but you can also see what's inside of you during that process. The AMA will sweep up people's questions, and then we're going to kick off the next week. We're going to do the global meet and greet, and then we'll kick off lecture 1 the week after that. So it's going to be really exciting. And if you're not interested in that, I have last week's very independent producer summit. We had 10 speakers. It went on for 6 hours. It was amazing. And there is a replay of it. LD, where can folks get the replay? Do you have that on screen? Or Joshua? Let's see. I didn't pull that one screen up. Shame on me. I forget where it is. universityofreason.com/lifestyle-liberty is where it was. Let me see if I can bring it up. Mindset. That's a different one. I got no.
I'm not sure
cache on
about
this browser.
the forward-facing page.
All right, so we'll find the link. Joshua just dropped it in the chat there, and we'll be able to get that to the audience momentito. So the VIP Summit, we're going to have play a sample for you. Like I said, there was 10 speakers. The gist is none of us have super special talents to do what we do. We took some time. We disciplined ourselves. We started to do things that provide value to others consistently. And then over time, we each have built up our own unique offering to the world, whether it's Corbett or Jay Dyer or Benny Wills or Mark Passio or any of the other speakers that we had. It was about showing that once upon a time, we were on the other side of the screen too. We were just a viewer. We were a spectator. We used to have jobs for paychecks, these sort of things. And then we started to refine ourselves, add skills, get experience, fortify all those things, get a lot of practice, fall down, get up, try, fail, succeed, and then keep going from there and don't quit on yourself. And as a coach, when I know you won't quit on yourself, I'm completely confident you'll be successful. But when we have that absence of confidence for ourselves, that absence of confidence leads to a lot of not success. So the things we teach in autonomy over the 12 weeks, they're substantial. They're not taught to you in school. It's how to learn anything. It's how to creatively problem solve. It's how to provide service and utility to other people. And it's how people do business on the internet, whether you're in paycheck world or you want to be an entrepreneur. These are skill sets to help you excel. And I highly encourage you to check out either the obstacle course at getautonomy.info/ignite or last weekend's very independent producer summit at universityofreason.com/lifestyle-liberty. There we go. Did we get that on screen at all, LD? Or I can click this and do it like this.
I can bring it up.
I got it. Here's the VIP summit. This is the replay. Here's the speakers. It was fantastic. It was really beyond my expectations all around. It was a big event for us behind the scenes. Everybody who showed up did what they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it. So technically it was all it was flawless. And then the guests were amazing, extraordinary, impeccable stories that I think are really inspiring, invigorating, and encouraging for anybody who checks it out.